As a student, I fantasized about visiting Egypt, the cradle of African civilization, the treasure chest of so much beauty in art and design. In spite of plunder by the colonialists, Egypt still is a country of fabulous wealth in ancient art and culture. I have always been anxious to see the pyramids, the Sphinx and the embalmed body of Ramesses II, perhaps one of the strongest pharaohs that ever ruled that country. From Addis, Oliver, Robert Rescher, who was to accompany me on the rest of my travels, and I flew to Cairo. I spent the whole morning of my first day in Cairo at the museum, looking at art, examining artifacts, making notes, learning about the type of men who founded the ancient civilization of the Nile Valley. My chief interest was to find out the type of men who founded the high civilization of olden times that thrived in the Nile Valley as far back as 5000 BC. This was not merely a question of archaeological interest, but one of cardinal importance to African thinkers, who are primarily concerned with the collection of scientific evidence to explode the fictitious claim of white propagandists that civilization began in Europe, and that Africans have no rich past that can compare with theirs. In a single morning, I discovered that Egyptians were creating great works of art and architecture when whites were still living in caves. I discussed the matter with one of the curators at the museum, but he was extremely cautious, and although he drew my attention to several theories on the matter, for which I was extremely grateful, I was no wiser on the subject than I was before I entered the museum. Later, Oliver took me to Giza, where we saw the colossal stone structure with its square base firmly planted on the ground where the sloping sides met at the apex, all done with mortar and giant blocks of stone, with which a monumental edifice was built, held in position by their own weight. Oliver took me for a boat ride around the island on the Nile, and as a boy of about 9 skillfully maneuvered the boat we were going to use, my otherwise fearless and calm comrade-in-arms widened his eye, watched the whole operation suspiciously, and explained, "Are we going to be driven by this small boy? Oh no." At the same time, he stepped back and stood at a safe distance. But when an elderly man took the controls, we relaxed, and I thoroughly enjoyed the 1-hour ride on Africa's longest river. Egypt was an important model for us, for we could witness at first hand a program of socialist economic reforms being launched by President Nasser. He had reduced private ownership of land, nationalized certain sectors of the economy, pioneered rapid industrialization, democratized education, and built a modern army. Many of these reforms were precisely the sorts of things that we in the ANC someday hoped to enact. At that time, however, it was more important to us that Egypt was the only African state with an army, navy, and air force that could in any way compare with those of South Africa.